Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Freedom in the Word. I am Minister Sherry Knotts.
And I'm Minister David Roundtree.
And we are back again talking about mourning and grief and bereavement. As Minister Roundtree so eloquently pointed out, that all those three words were used pretty much interchangeably in our everyday language when we're talking about grief and also mourning and bereavement in believers. So this segment, we're going to talk about the stages of grief.
Okay. Those stages of grief actually go back about 40, maybe 50 years ago to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she is credited for compiling this information where she lists 5 stages of grief. So the first would be denial. That would refer to the shock of the news of the death or the loss of something. And then the second one would be anger. You'll find many people go through anger, and many people are stuck right there. They don't really progress beyond that, so they're stuck in anger. The third one would really refer to religious people because it entails bargaining, right? So it's asking God why, or God, if you do this, or if you give them so much life,
I won't take another drink.
Right. I won't do any of that if you just spare this person's life. The fourth one is termed depression. Now, this is not necessarily clinical depression, right? This is not something that's going to last and affect a person, but this is the sadness, right? So the difference in this kind of depression and maybe clinical depression is that your self-esteem is held intact. Right? So you're sad, but you still believe in yourself. And
so you're sad just about the loss.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And then the last one would be the acceptance of the loss. So this is these are the 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
So in your practice, how with those steps, a person comes to you for grief counseling or things like that, how easy is it for you to identify which stage they're in? Sometimes
it's not very easy at all, and sometimes it's not really necessary, but just to know that the person is grieving, because each individual grieves in his or her own way. And so what we've learned since Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put all of this information together is that there is no linear step. You know, you don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody won't do that. But you can be all over the board. So not necessarily in that order. Absolutely not. Wow. So there's some who believe that they're not 5 stages, but 7 stages, and then others who believe that there are 11 stages, and so forth and so on. So just as the research is different, the individual is different too. So to know that the person is grieving is one thing, but to know the steps is not necessarily, or the step that they're in is not necessarily important.
How do you help someone who's struggling? Because there's grieving, and then there's, like you identified in the last segment, there's complicated grief.
Right.
So how do you help somebody who's they just can't seem to move forward?
Right. So that's a good question. The first thing you want to do is to, from a clinical perspective, is to make sure that the person is not in, the person doesn't have major depression, depressive disorder, or what we call dysthymia, or the person's not stuck in depression, right? So you want to make sure that the person is where they need to be in terms of what is normal grief. You want to make sure that you kind of tease out the relationship of the person who is lost, right? You want to talk about that relationship. You also want to look at the extent of the grief, how deep are you grieving? So if the person has recently passed and the person is grieving, that's not a good time to assess that. But when a person grieves, it's an indication that the relationship they were very close. So they had a good close relationship. And then to have them reflect on the fact that you really didn't have to have this relationship. Like if it's us, for example, if it's Christians, we didn't choose the family that we were born into or anything like that. So we could have been in any family, but God saw fit to have your paths cross in this lifetime. So, and that's a blessing. Also with Christians, you want to make sure that you focus on the hope. Again, what is hope? Hope is the ability to look beyond your present moment and see a better tomorrow. Right? So you want that person to always have a hope, to know that they will see that person again. If they simply live like that person lived, they can see that person again.
It would depend on how they live.
Right.
But it might be what they want. No,
it might be exactly what they want. So if that's what they want, live like that person lived, and you can have what they have. You can go where they go.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so now, when you were training for your therapy, training and credentials and degree and things like that, how difficult was it for you to go through the grieving process, or that to get that aspect of counseling down?
A part of that is just being exposure, right?
Okay.
So in terms of me going through that process with other people, it was basically here are these different theories in a nutshell, and now we're going to push you out in that pool, in that water. We don't care if you can swim or not.
Yeah.
so that's how you kind of get trained in this business.
Okay.
But for the most part, I've been very fortunate to have people to actually show me how to grieve.
Okay.
So
okay.
I've seen good grief, and I've seen bad grief.
So what's an example of bad grief?
Bad grief is when the death is sudden and tragic.
Okay.
Of course, death does not.
Yeah,
it doesn't knock on the
pick a
door.
number.
Yeah, it doesn't knock on the door. Doesn't ring the doorbell. Doesn't ask our permission to come in.
How do you want to go?
Right. Never get that, right? But one thing that does happen is that in the sense where there's not like an immediate loss, right?
Okay.
So if a person has cancer or something and they know that they're in decline, they begin to make plans and prepare.
Okay.
So I've seen bad grief in the sense that the person might be prepared, but the family is not, right? So I've seen that, unfortunately, with when the family's not prepared. The person will have expired, but they're on life support, and they will not unplug the machine.
They're not gonna sign that paper.
Right. It's a good time to look at the advanced directives of the loved one. So,
what are advanced directives?
Absolutely, good question. So basically, the last wishes of the person, right? So if that person may sign what they call in the hospital a DNR, for example.
Do not resuscitate.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that grandma, who's 115 years old, is not having her chest pumped to the point where it's breaking ribs and causing more damage. So she may sign a DNR, saying that if I pass, let me pass.
Yeah. And let me tell you, I did CPR. I had to do compressions, and to feel the person's ribs break and to feel the sternum break at your hand. I didn't kill him. He was already gone, but I'm sitting there, but that's the pressure that you have to exert on that person. And I'm like, which is why I told you off camera, I'd share it with my daughter. I don't want them doing that to me.
Right.
And because it's pretty painful. I can remember probably about 10, 15 years ago, maybe, they had started this thing where they would invite one or two family members in so they could see what you do to a person when you say, go ahead, I want everything done. I want everything done, especially in cases where it's like, okay, grandma's 115 years old. Come on, man.
Right.
So they would bring allow one family member in, and then once they saw all the trauma, that stop, no, let them go. So along those same lines, as you mentioned before, it's not just always a death. It could be the ending of a relationship.
Okay, I'm trying to say this and be serious about it because it is like a serious, it's very serious matter. But it is actually a part of grief. You're grieving the loss of that relationship.
Loss of control.
So either you were all in and the person was not, and you discovered that, and so the relationship terminated, or just both of you decided to part ways. So it is a loss.
It is.
It was basically when a person's in a relationship, that person is saying that I'm in love with the other person, and love involves vulnerability. Right. So when a person is vulnerable with another, the Bible says it this way in Genesis, right? That Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed. They were vulnerable to each other, right? So when we come into a relationship like that, it's very tragic for that relationship to have ended.
So with that, Adam and Eve, it's very hard now for people to have those types of relationships, because now in the world we live in, a lot of times people have had multiple relationships before they join in. So the vulnerability is a hard thing. So I think that's why a lot of times when relationships end, it's harder for people sometimes, especially like you said, when they're all in, it's harder for them, and the grief is a long drawn out process.
It becomes traumatic.
Yes. Any closing thoughts on the stages of grief?
The stages of grief, there are no linear stage. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could be all over the place. They're not necessarily 5 stages to grief. So the way an individual grieves is the way that individual grieves. There could be twins who do it completely different. So however you do it, make sure you do it, and
give God the glory all along the way.
absolutely.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, in the meantime, I am Minister Sherry Knotts.
And I'm Minister David Roundtree.
And we'll be talking to you soon. God bless you.